Most people believe centralization is a choice, a design, a preference made by rulers who wanted more control. But history suggests something quieter and more unsettling. Sometimes power does not grow because it is desired, but because disorder becomes unbearable. In the story of France, centralization did not begin as ambition. It began as a response, a pressure, a memory that refused to fade. This is a story about how fear shapes systems, how trauma hardens into order, and how a nation, trying to protect itself from collapse, slowly builds something it can no longer loosen. This story lives in medieval and early modern France, not in a single king, not in one law or palace, but in a long pattern, repeated across generations, where instability teaches authority what it must become. France did not wake up one morning and decide to centralize. It learned to do so by surviving what happens when nothing holds. In the early medieval world, France was not a unified state. It was a loose idea, draped over fragmented lands. Power rested with local lords, regional nobles, bishops, and rival families. The king existed, but often only in name. Authority was personal, not structural. Loyalty moved sideways, not upward. Obligation was negotiated, not enforced. This system was not irrational. It reflected a world where distance was slow, communication fragile, and trust local. Order lived close to the soil. But decentralization carries a quiet risk. When crisis arrives, coordination fractures. Over time, France experienced this fracture again and again. Private wars between nobles, cities resisting royal demands, regions behaving like independent states, justice shifting depending on who held land or arms, taxes collected inconsistently or not at all. Power existed everywhere, which meant responsibility existed nowhere. The system survived only because nothing yet had tested it deeply enough. Then pressure began to accumulate. The first great pressure was war. Long war, disruptive war, the kind that outlives generations. The conflict we later call the 100 Years' War did more than drain resources. It exposed structural weakness. France was invaded repeatedly. Territories were lost and reclaimed. Allegiances shifted. Nobles defected. Armies dissolved. In moments of crisis, decentralized loyalty revealed its cost. When coordination mattered most, authority was scattered. The crown learned something painful. You cannot defend a realm that does not listen. Out of this pressure emerged a subtle shift, not yet absolutism, not ideology, but necessity. The king began to demand more consistent taxes, more standing forces, more reliable administrators, more obedience that did not depend on personal loyalty. Each demand felt temporary, each reform justified as emergency. But emergencies have a way of repeating. As war faded, another pressure surfaced: internal instability. France was not only fighting external enemies, it was negotiating itself. Regional identities remained strong. Languages varied. Customary laws contradicted one another. Courts disagreed. Nobles guarded privileges fiercely. Power was layered, overlapping, and often contradictory. This complexity created flexibility, but also constant friction. When authority is divided, conflict multiplies quietly. Disputes linger, justice delays, violence becomes local. The crown increasingly positioned itself not as conqueror, but as arbiter. Central authority began presenting itself as neutral order, standing above factions. This framing mattered. Power, when framed as restraint, becomes easier to accept. By the 16th century, pressure reached another breaking point. Religion entered the structure. The wars of religion did not simply divide belief. They fractured trust. Catholics and Protestants did not merely disagree. They feared one another. Cities turned inward. Massacres erupted. Allegiances became volatile. Once again, decentralization showed its cost. Local autonomy meant local violence. Independent power meant competing truths. In this environment, neutrality itself became a form of power. The crown began to claim a role not just as ruler, but as stabilizer, a force above belief, a guarantor of continuity. Order, once again, justified concentration. What emerges here is not tyranny in intention, but accumulation by response. Each crisis left behind an institutional scar. New taxes survived after wars ended. New offices remained after emergencies passed. New legal precedents hardened into norm. Power learned from trauma. By the time figures like Richelieu appear, centralization no longer feels radical. It feels overdue. Richelieu did not invent the impulse toward control. He systematized it. He weakened noble independence. He strengthened royal administration. He expanded surveillance of dissent. He treated disorder as an existential threat. But even here, the language remained defensive. The goal was not domination. It was stability. France had learned repeatedly that fragmentation invited collapse, and so the system began to value uniformity over negotiation, predictability over flexibility, command over compromise. Gradually, the logic deepened. If disorder is dangerous, then autonomy becomes suspect. If rebellion emerges locally, oversight must become central. If belief divides, authority must stand above belief. Power stopped apologizing for its growth. It began to explain itself as necessity. By the time Louis XIV stands at the center of this story, much has already been decided. The Sun King did not create absolutism from nothing. He inherited its logic. Versailles was not just a palace, it was a mechanism. By drawing the nobility into proximity, ritual, and dependence, the crown transformed political threat into performance. Power became visible, regulated, observed. Centralization reached its most refined expression here, elegant, ceremonial, controlled. But it still carried the memory of fear of fragmentation, fear of civil war, fear of chaos returning. Absolute power, in this sense, was not born from arrogance alone. It was shaped by long exposure to instability. A system built to prevent collapse eventually learned to fear looseness itself. And this is where the pattern deepens. Once power organizes itself around preventing disorder, it begins to interpret difference as danger, deviation as instability, dissent as erosion. The system tightens not because it desires cruelty, but because it remembers pain. Centralization becomes a kind of institutional memory. Each generation inherits the structure, but not the original trauma that justified it. The mechanism remains even when the danger fades. What began as protection becomes habit. What began as response becomes identity. And slowly, the question shifts. Not, how do we survive chaos? But how do we maintain control? This shift is subtle, often invisible to those living inside it. Power still speaks the language of order, still claims necessity, still references past collapse. But now, the system itself has become the thing being preserved. Here, history stops being about France alone, because this pattern repeats. Again and again, societies centralize in moments of fear. They concentrate authority to survive shocks. They reward coherence. They punish fragmentation. And over time, they forget the difference between stability and rigidity. What began as defense hardens into doctrine. The system starts shaping people instead of serving them. And yet, without those early traumas, without those crises, the system might never have formed at all. This is the uncomfortable tension. Centralization emerges not from evil intent, but from accumulated consequence, from repeated exposure to collapse, from the quiet conclusion that looseness costs too much. France did not choose absolutism in a single moment. It drifted toward it, guided by memory, fear, and a desire for order, which raises a quieter question. If power is shaped less by ambition than by trauma, if systems harden in response to what they survive, then what pressures are shaping our own structures now? What fears are being quietly encoded into the systems we accept as necessary? And when we look at authority, Centralized, efficient, justified. Are we seeing intention or inheritance? Perhaps every system carries a memory it cannot explain. Perhaps what looks like control is often an echo, and perhaps the most enduring forms of power are not built to dominate, but to make sure a certain kind of collapse never happens again. If you found this exploration insightful, give this video a like, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Timeless Questions channel for more deep dives into philosophy, history, and human nature. Because the questions may be ancient, but the wisdom is timeless.